13.3 is Soviet Communism under Joseph Stalin, and certainly one of the more regrettable videos that you'll have this year in terms of the cost of human life. So it's kind of a tempered thing, but in any case, it is an extremely important section for us to understand not only the development of the Soviet Union, but even Russia today. So with that in mind, let's start with a review of Vladimir Lenin's philosophy. Again, Lenin, when leading the Russian Revolution, is going to adapt parts of what Karl Marx wrote about in the Communist Manifesto. He is not going to fulfill the Marxist vision of a kumbaya, no government, everyone's sharing everything in an atheistic society. That's something that Lenin's not going to go that far. Again, Lenin's difference is that if I bring in a dozen donuts into the room, then I've got to make sure that there is a committee there or a person to redistribute all those goods and donuts so to make sure that everybody has a fair share. So Lenin, when leading the Russian Revolution, is going to do so with the intent of keeping government there, but a government that morphs Russia into from that conservative rural state into a communistic industrial state. That's his goal, and he has a nice cat too, I must say. But the problem for Lenin is that the Russian economy sucks. Post-Civil War, post-revolution, post-World War I, this government is in, or this economy is in trouble. And the problem with socialism, if you are going to develop a socialist economy, which is what Lenin is doing, then you have to try to give your citizens individual incentive to work. Because again, like if you have a socialist economy, everybody's going to get an equal share. So what motivates you to be top of the pile? There's nothing really, right? So to make that happen, Lenin decides to encourage the peasants to work harder by giving them some personal incentive. So he's going to drop little bits of capitalism into the communist economy that he wants to develop. And that dropping of little bits of capitalism is called the New Economic Policy, the NEP. And the NEP basically allows peasants to sell surplus amounts of their own grain after giving the necessary amount to the state. So let's explain. So it lit up my face. So we have here on the left side, let's call this guy Harold. Okay, here's Harold. Harold, under the communist system, regular communist system seen in the Russian Civil War, he grows 10 tons of wheat. The government takes the whole surplus, right, 9 of it, leaving him with his required amount to live. So that's Harold. Then we have Cornelius down here, who is growing 1 ton and is left with that because that's what he needs to survive. And the government takes nothing because, again, what did I name him? Cornelius. I forgot his name. He's very forgettable. Basically, he has no incentive to grow anything else, right? Because, he's going to be left with 1. So the government's like, well, I guess if you don't have any more. So you can see how the supply is going to be hurt, and that means that everybody across the country is getting less wheat. So here's what Lenin's solution is. 10 tons of wheat, the government now takes half to redistribute. So that leaves you with the 1 that you need plus a surplus. And with that surplus, you can do whatever you want with it. So if Harold wants to sell it, if he wants to keep it, it's up to him. And that gives him incentive to grow more, because again, if he sells it, then he has some cash, he can buy like a Lamborghini or something on the side. So, and as far as Cornelius's life goes, it sucks because now he only has a half ton of wheat and he's going to die. Very sad. Well, Lenin dies. Speaking of, Lenin dies, the NEP working well, but when Lenin dies, it creates a power struggle in the Communist Party for who's going to come next and who's going to be the next leader. You really have 2 options at this point. You have Leon Trotsky, you have Joseph Stalin. 2 very different strategies. Trotsky wanted communism to spread across the world. Stalin, though, before that happens, felt that Russia, or the Soviet Union, needed to become strong. So you basically say, all right, Trotsky, go for it, man, right? I mean, just spread it all, just like an STD. Sorry. But Stalin says, no, we got to strengthen here, and then we can worry about going abroad. And due to his political maneuvering, Stalin will be the one that claims authority of the Communist Party. And Stalin becomes the newest leader of the Soviet Union. So let's talk about the Soviet Union under his rule. What we're going to see, and this is kind of a shout out back to 10.2, is Stalin and Hitler, and we'll get to Hitler in 13.4. I meant 13.2 a second ago. Totalitarianism. What we're going to see under these two is the development of a government that has complete control of society. Not complete control of, like, the state. So we're not talking about absolute monarchs where one king has control of all government functions. We're talking about a government having control of everything. And if you're like, oh, well, let's see America, like the government controls it. False. Not in America, right? I mean, I can talk bad about our president right now, and I'm not going to get a knock at the door. But what Stalin and Hitler will create is a society that does introduce that dynamic. So what you'll see is, and again, go back to 13.2 and watch this, because that's kind of what you need to see there. But one thing I will highlight is this, is that the interest of the state is much more important in a totalitarian government than your individual dreams. Again, the state's interest is much more important than the individual's dreams or rights. Now, how does this play out for Stalin? For Stalin, if you remember trying to see if there's a hammer and sickle around here. I don't see one. But anyway, for Stalin, he felt, again, to restore the Russian economy and to restore Russia's greatness, Soviet Union, they needed to become stronger and catch up to the rest of the industrialized powers. Stalin felt that the Soviet Union was 50 years behind the rest of the world. We're talking Western Europe. He's probably right. Remember, that hurt them in World War I, as they didn't have the industry to be able to succeed. So Stalin feels that they need to improve their industry, and because of that, have more productive agriculture. So the agriculture basically powers the industry by providing a stable, affluent food source for your industrial workers. So for the industry, Stalin is going to create the 5-year plans. Basically, these are set in a series of goals in which Stalin believes after 5 years, this is where Russia needs to be. So for example, that Russia needs to have 300% more steel production or 150% more oil production, whatever it might be. Stalin wants to increase production. He says, like what we're doing right now, in 5 years from now, we need to be making 3 times as much steel. And it's going to be successful, right? I mean, you're going to see industrial production go way up, but sometimes the quality of the goods will be poor. The standard of living doesn't rise because you're basically, at this point, you're working your people to death because you're pushing to make up that gap, because Britain, France, the Germans before World War I, the United States are up here, and the Soviet Union's down here. So how can we close the gap? Well, we can just work harder. And that's what the 5-year plans were designed to do. But again, part of the thing for you to work harder is for you to be fed and be powered through, food. So that leads us to perhaps the most devastating element of Stalin's rule, and that's collectivization. Peasants that own their own land will be told, hey, your land, it's not yours anymore. You're going to be moving to a government-run farm called a collective to grow food to feed industrial workers. And then, back in our war communism example, the opposite of the NEP, the government's going to come in and take basically all of what you produce and send it to the cities. And it gets to the point where there's not much left for the peasants to even eat. Even if they grow all of it, then it's all taken to the industrial areas. So anyone who resists this, and there was a group of people called kulaks, who were landowning peasants in the Ukraine, they resisted and were systematically killed as a social class, erased, liquidated, eliminated by Stalin's harsh rule. Some opponents were sent to gulags, which were labor camps primarily in Siberia, but the devastation from this event is absolutely incredibly devastating. devastating. And the reports, I mean, are hard to even look at some of the pictures. This, as it shows, it's not ignored, but not acted upon. And millions of people will die in these famines that are instigated by the Soviet government in order to produce a higher industrial economy. Collectives are these farms in which these atrocities will happen. One would have to argue, and one would have to think, question, well, how does Stalin become, like, beloved? Like, how does he become a leader that in these urban industrial areas becomes someone who is revered? Well, that's getting to our totalitarian society. Propaganda will glorify work and encourage productivity, and as a matter of fact, for workers, it's not half bad. Pensions, free education, daycare centers, all these are benefits for the industrial workers and encouragement to work harder, and that Stalin's got your back, right? And that he's pushing the Soviet Union to something greater. Churches are converted to museums of atheism. Following the Marxist model, you eliminate religion from society because it is a dividing line. It creates inequality at times. And then women are given certain freedoms and encouraged to work. You are seeing a lot of gender equality in the Soviet Union because, again, Stalin and the Communist Party don't want that division. They don't want men and women doing separate things. They want to use the collective to be able to go and accomplish things. Well, with that in mind, and again, people would like visit the Soviet Union in the 30s, and while the Great Depression was going on back in the United States and Western Europe, and say, you know what, this communism thing is going pretty well. But again, they would not go to the rural areas in the Ukraine and Siberia and see the immense devastation that was being wrought by the Soviet order. Perhaps then maybe you did see that and you started to speak out against Stalin's rule. Well, then you could be in very much a large bit of danger. Stalin in the late 1930s is going to launch an event called the Purges, in which all potential opponents, anyone who could perhaps be a threat to Stalin, would be targeted and knocked out. And that included anyone who was with Stalin at the beginning when Lenin and the October Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, happened during 1917. So anyone who had seen Stalin at that beginning point and maybe had some insight to what Lenin wanted for this revolution and perhaps could question Stalin, he would have them eliminated, whether they disappear, whether they be arrested or shot, sent to a gulag. And there were many ways that that could happen. Hey, sorry for that break. You didn't have or know that that was happening, but we had a break because someone will not go to sleep. So, Maisie, I know it is your dream to talk about Stalinist Russia. What do you say? You want to talk about Stalin? Okay, well, that sounded like a yes. So anyway, millions of citizens affected in certainly negative ways. This is a chart. We looked at this earlier. I understand, yes. This is basically Lenin's group that came in with him in 1917 in that Bolshevik Revolution. And you can look at this a little carefully and zoom in and see that anyone who was basically impacted around 1936 to 40, it's a very common way that they went out, right, with cause of death. And it was a very, sad ending for them. But those were people that Stalin felt were threats to his rule, so he had them, quote, dealt with. And that is a part of an event called the Purges. Yes? Yes? Oh, now we have snot. Okay, so the boogers are out. Understood. So, Maisie, look at this picture. This is a picture of Joseph Stalin. It's his head of security on his left, your right. And he had served Stalin for like 10 or 15 years. So something that Stalin would often do is that if he felt you were getting, too comfortable with perhaps your position, that he made the paranoia that Stalin had, maybe you were planning a rebellion, a coup or something against him. So Stalin had this guy arrested, I know, it's very sad, isn't it? He had him arrested, then sent to a gulag, and then attempted to destroy any evidence that the man had ever existed. Because they found this picture when the Soviet Union fell, and they also found this document. I know, it is a mystery, isn't it? So that guy had just basically been cut out, because Stalin, not only does he take you out if you're a threat to him, but he tries to remove any evidence that you had even existed. Oh, Maisie, you're making this hard. One other story here to close is Trotsky, his old rival. Trotsky had flown to Mexico on exile. Apparently I can't talk about this anymore. Someone wants me to shut up. But in Mexico, Trotsky had been in exile, and Stalin believed that he was planning some sort of rebellion against him from Mexico. I'm not sure if that happens. So he sends an agent to Mexico to stab him in the head with an ice pick. One of the most interesting assassination attempts and plots that you will ever hear. So I've got my hands full here, and I think we're done with this video. So Stalin and Russia, not a great scene and not a great thing, but Maisie has made this as entertaining as possibly could be. Next section, 13.4, we're going to look at Hitler and fascist Germany, the difference between a communist totalitarian country and a fascist totalitarian country as Hitler grows in power around the same time as Stalin. So let me push the pause button here. Maisie, say bye. Say bye. Can you say bye? Okay.